Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to see all of you all, and on a beautiful day like this. And it's a pleasure to welcome our guest of honor. It's always a pleasure to have Paul Grogan here. I think Paul has been here 3 times, maybe 4 times over the course of these seminars, which started in 2003. The reason Paul really started with us, we haven't had many community foundation presidents here. And I looked around the country and I said, you know, there's one that really stands out. At that point, Paul had came, I think, it was about the same year. When did you get to Boston Foundation?
2001.
2001. And he was already stirring things up in Boston. And those of you who are in the community foundation world know what I mean when I say that Paul really has set the pace for change in the field of community foundations. I mean, there was a time during most of the history. Community foundations started in the United States. The first one was the Cleveland Foundation, which is 100 years old plus a few years, and they did really important stuff, taking stock of the problems of cities, organizing the elites to work and figure out how to try to tackle solving some of these problems and so forth. And that was the model for community foundations all over the country for all practical purposes. But when Paul took over the Boston Foundation, he will tell you more about what has happened, what he's done there. Maybe he won't because he's too modest, but when you think about, just picture this, one of the first things that the Boston Foundation did, I think it got started even before Paul got there, was it cleaned up Boston Harbor. That's a massive job. It was before you got there. When did they start? They actually started it. But you completed it.
It's one of our greatest hits.
Yes, and you declared that it was done, if I remember correctly, right? But the point is that it sort of symbolizes it. And that was a kind of a simple thing to do, because cleaning up a harbor is pretty easy compared to getting differing constituencies in cities to work together in trying to solve the problems, and in taking sometimes hard positions on matters, and conducting experiments on such things as whether, as the extent to which charter schools perform better than public schools, and publishing the results as a consequence of those kinds of things. But it's that kind of the movement that Paul, I want to say sparked. I'm not sure he sparked it, but he certainly led it for all practical purposes all over the country. And now there are a group of community foundations in the country who are really trying to do the same kind of thing, being active, organizing the community, finding out what the community wants, getting good research done to see what the options are, helping implement those, and taking the responsibilities for marketing the idea of some of these changes. And so it's a significant change in the role of community foundations historically. So that's the reason because the landscape is changing so rapidly, that I found it really helpful to have Paul come back and talk about at various stages what the Boston Foundation's been able to do, what he's led with, the kinds of problems that he's had, and so forth. And that may be of help to those of you who are in community foundations as well. As you probably know, Paul, how was he able to do what he did? Well, he had a lot of training. He worked for Mayor Kevin White and Mayor Raymond Flynn in Boston. He got really high baptism in politics. One of his most impressive achievements, we were laughing about it in the office before he got here, is, for years, the president of Harvard had never ever met or talked to the mayor of Boston. As difficult as that may say, how many years do you think it was?
Oh, forever.
Forever. In any event, it's a signal triumph for Paul. He was as head of Harvard's community relations and other relevant activities, governmental things, for 3 years. And one of the first things he did was to say, we're not going to solve any of these problems if we don't get the president of Harvard and the mayor of Boston to talk to one another. And so he introduced them. or he facilitated an introduction. And in a way, the rest is history, because lots of cooperative ventures now between Boston and Cambridge and Harvard and other educational institutions there. So it's that kind of leadership and political skills bring to bear. Paul, in addition to his work for the Boston Foundation, he was the founder of the Community Development Trust, which was the first real estate investment trust dedicated to affordable housing in the United States. Last year alone, Community Development Trust leveraged nearly $750 million to construct or preserve over 4,000 units of below market rate housing. He is also the co-author, though you will remember, some of you have been participating in this, Tony, with Tony Proscio. He's the co-author with Tony Proscio of a book called Comeback Cities. Before actually taking over the Boston Foundation, Paul led the Local Initiatives Support Corporation. How many of you know about what LISC is? LISC, for those of you who don't know, LISC was the creation of the Ford Foundation. A remarkable program officer of the Ford Foundation, Mike Sviridoff, who got the insight that the question was, why is it that the for-profit finance market, life insurance companies, banks, and were not putting any money into cities, into housing and job creation in cities? And Mike Sviridoff said there's got to be a reason for this. And he came to the conclusion that the reason was that the financial institutions did not know how to judge credit worthiness. They simply didn't have the ability to do it. They didn't have the capacity to do it. And so he not only created it, and then he left the Ford Foundation to run it initially before Paul came along to run it. He created LISC, which created little LISCs all over the United States, and they developed the capacity to measure the credit worthiness of potential borrowers, mainly minorities, African Americans, poor people, whatever, who needed money to start businesses, to build homes, etc. And Paul led it, I think, for 13 years. 15 years, longest tenure before the current president, who is still, I think, riding on Paul's glory there. But forgive me for saying that. In any event, it really is a privilege to have Paul here. There are few people who know about the problems of cities more intimately than he does, and I always look forward to hearing what he has to say and how things have changed over the last several years in Boston since you were last here. So welcome. Thank you very much for coming.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I think we can just go to the Q&A, can't we, from here? I just want to leave completely undisturbed all those wonderful things that were just said about me. But seriously, I prize this invitation. I'm humbled by it, knowing the kinds of folks that Joel brings into this seminar here at Sanford. So to be invited and be invited back a couple times is thrilling for me, and I'm quite envious of all of the students around the table. I never had the opportunity to do a public policy study, and I would have liked to have had this kind of opportunity. I've done the best I could without it, but I thought what I would do is talk a little bit more about what we've tried to do with the Community Foundation in Boston. But one of the things that I think has shifted is the stakes are really higher than they used to be, because we're in a period where America must find a way to go forward and meet the challenges that are there, make the improvements in our country that need to be made. And I think we're in a period where the action, the innovation, the drive to do that will be largely a local phenomenon. And that's not a new thing. I mean, America has functioned like that many times in the past. But so local capacity, the ability to define problems and act on them that communities have or don't have are going to be very, very important. And the theory, I want to give you today is that community foundations could be a much larger part of that necessary ferment of positive change that needs to go on in communities while we deal with what's happening on the national and the international level. Talking about the Boston Foundation just a little bit, it was one of the early ones. Joel mentioned Cleveland. Boston was in a group of 8 or 9 community foundations that formed the next year. But the Boston Foundation was in a particularly lucky position because just as the foundation was formed, as all the early ones were as part of a trust bank, the Boston Safe Deposit and Trust in this case, a wealthy industrialist who had been involved in developing the idea with other civic players in Boston died and left his entire $2 million fortune to the Boston Foundation completely unrestricted. And so from the beginning, the Boston Foundation was equipped with resources that allowed it to become proactive. And one of the problems, and we'll talk more about this later, with community foundations is that they lack the flexible capital that is necessary if you're going to be an initiator of things. But fortunately, we got that early gift. We were not the first community foundation formed, but our research around our centennial, Joel, revealed that we were the first community foundation to make a grant in the United States. So we're very proud of that. But it was a consequence of that happy accident of the bequest, the extraordinary bequest that was made to the foundation. I think it's important to recognize what an innovation community foundations were. It's nothing like it had ever existed, and philanthropy in those days consisted largely of poor relief, of coming to the aid of needy folks. There was no thought that philanthropy or charity could be a strategic asset in trying to bring about major change. And that was what was so marvelous, what was articulated by the founder of the Cleveland Foundation and Boston and some of the others, is they had this idea that if they created an institution, that they could use philanthropy very differently and they hoped with more impact than had been the case up to that point. But there was no blueprint, no roadmap of what these institutions should be doing and how they should operate. And at the very same time, and Joel's written about this so much, the first of the big national foundations formed as well, and that too was a kind of a de novo concept. What are these institutions going to do, and how are they can act? The community foundations particularly came about as one of many responses that the country was trying to make, coping really with what was happening between 1880 and 1920 in our country, which was tremendous industrialization, urbanization, immigration, and it was the Industrial Revolution really taking hold in the United States. But it was a wrenching period for all the economic stuff that was going on. There was a lot of antipathy for the immigrants that were coming at that point, mostly from Eastern Europe, largely Catholic, weren't as welcomed as earlier, but were needed. And therefore they got in, even though they suffered, of course, extensive discrimination. And so this sense of things coming loose, cities doubling and tripling in size, the appearance of urban problems for the first time in a country that still saw itself as an agrarian country at that point, resisted the idea of urbanization. That was Europe. We were going to be different, but here we were creating these huge cities. And so a lot of things went on then to try to cope with this, including the creation of settlement houses that were particularly focused on bringing immigrants into the mainstream, the growth of YMCAs and boys clubs, institutions like that, the passage for the first time of compulsory school laws in state after state that were experiencing, particularly the immigration, the fear of not Americanizing the children, and so you develop a very different society. So it was an interesting period, and the community foundations came in kind of at the tail end of that incredible ferment. But like a lot of things that went on in that period, the community foundations have proved to be very durable. There are now nearly 800 in the United States, and a kind of a roughly equal number abroad, I think, at this point. And they are growing, and assets and grant making is growing very, very rapidly. It has remained, and I think it can be, an even more attractive concept. And one of the things that's very attractive about it is the place base of it. We're concerned about a place, and people have attachments to place, where you were brought up, where you went to school, whatever, and community foundations play to that. And it was interesting, there was an exchange some years ago between Bill Gates and Michael Porter about cities, and Bill Gates said, you know, cities aren't going to matter because you can do anything you need to do from anywhere. And Michael Porter said, when you can do anything from anywhere, the distinctiveness of place matters that much more. I thought that was just a brilliant and very wise insight. And of course, we have seen and are seeing, it's not smooth or even, but there's a tremendous urban renaissance going on in this country today. So cities have hardly been extinguished by the internet. And
in Durham, too.
In Durham, too. If you look at the foundation today, we're one of the oldest and largest. We have about 1.2 billion in total assets. We and our donors distribute well over $100 million in grants, mostly to Boston area nonprofits every year. It's a very successful institution on that kind of basis. The reputation of the foundation, which was stellar long before I got there, the Boston Foundation is very highly regarded in the foundation world. And one of the things about it that is incredibly distinctive and illustrates so many things is that as we excavated the history of the foundation for the centennial, one of the things that just leapt out at us was the number of times the foundation had provided the first grant or a very early grant to an institution or an idea that grew up to really be something. The foundation, for whatever reason, had two things going for it that a lot of foundations didn't. That flexible capital that I mentioned, not having to consult a donor to deploy that, but being able to just do it. And receptivity to new ideas. I don't know how this happened, but the early folks who ran the foundation got the idea that just as Boston was innovative in medicine and law and politics and technology, it was innovative in the nonprofit sector. People had ideas, and with the Boston Foundation, they had a place to bring those ideas. And the result has been a stunning parade of wonderful organizations that we try to take complete credit for because we gave them their early grant. And it ranges from big mainstream institutions like the New England Aquarium. The birth of public television happened in Boston, funded by the Boston Foundation. The cleanup of the Boston Harbor, and the creation of just so many health, education, cultural institutions. And we've made a kind of a mantra out of this because it supplies, and we'll talk about this later, people don't know what philanthropy does, and it's a big problem the field has. But this has supplied a kind of a handle to understand at least part of what the Boston Foundation has been all about. And isn't that cool that it has been about that? Because there are all these institutions in place today that we can remind them, and so we call it the there at the beginning phenomenon. We now have a wall in our offices in Boston with over 100 of these ideas and organizations listed, and people get a real kick out of connecting. In fact, when we did our centennial, the inevitable gala dinner that we did, we had planted heads of organizations, current heads of organizations that got their first money from the Boston Foundation, and there was this marvelous kind of call and response thing that went on in the dinner, and so it's really been a great thing for us and a great marker for the Boston Foundation, because so large a fraction of this marvelous nonprofit infrastructure that we have in Boston just wouldn't have happened without the Boston Foundation. There's no question about it. And there are so many foundations, as we know, that don't even accept unsolicited grants. But the Boston Foundation, was in a very different place. Now, despite all that accomplishment and just great feelings about what the foundation had done, when my illustrious predecessor retired, and it's a woman named Anna Faith Jones, who's the first African-American woman to head a major American foundation, and she was president of the foundation for 18 or 19 years and did a wonderful job, and I'm very grateful to her for some really big things that she accomplished. And she did the board a favor of giving them plenty of notice. She basically announced it, I think, nearly a year in advance that she was going to retire. And that gave the board time, which they used extraordinarily well, to go off and talk very candidly and openly about the strengths and weaknesses of the Boston Foundation and what some aspirations that some of the directors had for it. And they had the courage, even for a strong, well thought of institution, to ask the question, is the Boston Foundation all it can be? And the answer they came back with was no. As great as it is, it could be so much more, but it will require this institution to really change. And what they meant by that is that the Boston Foundation had conducted its business very quietly. It was a kind of, maybe reflecting its Brahmin origins, a kind of a decorous culture to the place. Doing good quietly was what the foundation was all about, and they did a lot of good, as I've just said. But there's some things were happening in our town. One of the big things that was happening is corporate consolidation. And with corporate consolidation and the loss of headquarters companies came the loss of business leaders who used to be involved in the city, and they weren't there anymore. And there was this kind of a big topic in the city, and there was all this worry about Boston becoming kind of a second-class city and not a fierce to. But a subset of those concerns was, where are we going to get the philanthropy, and where are we going to get the involvement of powerful, influential people who used to be around the table and now are in North Carolina, among other places. And a number of the directors felt that in having these wide-ranging discussions about the future, that the Boston Foundation needed to become a more public and visible institution, that the work was too important to be behind a screen. As one director memorably said to me, if we want to attract resources, have an impact, just exactly how does it help us that nobody knows who we are or what we're doing? And that was pretty much the case. There was, as I got in there and did the inevitable 100 interview listening tour that you do with a big transition like that, it was incredible the extent to which the foundation had disappeared. Beyond those who had a business in knowing it, grantees obviously, board members, people said things to me like, is that part of City Hall or is that part of the Boston Globe? Gee, I've never heard of it. Active, involved people in the city. I mean, it was an extreme case of almost self-imposed obscurity that had been going on a long time. And the board said, there are other ways to make a difference beside a grant. What if we were influential? What if our opinion mattered about things? Can't we help not be the answer to this loss of corporate participation, but can't we be part of the answer? We're a permanent institution, we have assets, those who know us respect us. Couldn't we be a player there? And without specifying how that should be done or what it should look like, they said, that's what we're doing. And then they went looking for someone that they thought could do that, and I'm the fortunate one that they asked to do that. But it was, I thought, just a tremendous example of stewardship, the way it ought to occur for institutions like this, that even with an institution with strong reputation, the strong reputation we had, using an epical transition, like the end of a 20-year presidency or whatever, to really open all the doors and windows and get all the advice you can, and they did that. And the result has been just a dramatic change in the Boston Foundation, which we implemented fairly quickly, and there were a number of elements to what we decided to do, and it didn't come full blown. It was, you know, a lot of back and forth and thinking this through. But what we wanted to redefine the Boston Foundation as not just a grant maker, but an institution that is helping this community define the challenges it faces and act on them. That's what the Boston Foundation could really make a contribution to, being a force for confronting, understanding, defining the issues, and then trying to understand what it would take to do something about them. And in order to do that, we added a whole set of functions to the foundation that didn't formerly exist at all. We started with data and research. We knew that Boston being the kind of town it is, that not everyone might be applauding that the Boston Foundation is expanding its role. So we have to think about this. How do we build acceptability and so forth? And we said the place to start is data and research. Who can be against, you know, being exposed to great work that is talking about trends and challenges and issues in our city? And already at the foundation was a research platform called the Boston Indicators Project, which was one of the first civic indicators projects anywhere. But it was in the early stages. But we used that as a platform, and we began commissioning significant amounts of research, taking advantage of the extraordinary, as you have here, extraordinary academic community that's in place, and the eagerness on a lot of people to work with us, which was very gratifying. And we began churning out provocative and interesting research on a regular basis. But we didn't want reports alone, or reports that were going to go on a shelf. We wanted reports that had a reasonable chance of actually getting something to happen. And we decided a way to do that was to work very hard at developing a set of convenings in the course of every year that would bring leaders and citizens together to hear about the latest research that's just come out, or other important matters, and to talk about what's to be done about it. And these things have worked extraordinarily well because we had people at the foundation who just were maniacal about it. And so the quality of the research that we turn out is first rate, and it's never been significantly challenged or overturned anything we've ever done. And so that gave us credibility with the press, and we enjoy just the benefit of the doubt to this day from the press in Boston because of the known quality and unassailability, frankly, of the work that we've done. And then we set about doing these convenings. We got office space that really lent itself to all different kinds of meetings, and we began putting these together. And it turned out we were pushing on an open door, tapping into a hunger that was there, because to the extent that stunned us, people turned out for these forums. They wanted to be connected to a civic discussion about the big issues. And now today, the reputation we have as a convener is really unbelievable. It's like almost no matter what we put up there, if 300 or 400 people show up. It's just incredible, but you know, what an asset that it's worked out for us that way. So research, convenings, media. We went from a foundation that shunned publicity, never wanted to be in the papers. There was one part-time person when I got there at the foundation who was there for communications and to receive calls from the press, which never came. So she was not a busy person. But we decided that that was wrong, that again, if we wanted people to know what we're doing and who we are, and we want to attract partners and stir things up, people got to know about it. And so we built from the ground up a press and public affairs capacity at the foundation, which is now 10 people in total. And again, I got lucky. I came, a woman who had been in the newspaper business her whole career, a woman named Mary Jo Meisner. She was the editor of the Milwaukee Journal, city editor of the Washington Post. I mean, a stellar journalist looking for something different to do that would make use of her skills, and I turned to her to create this just incredible public affairs unit at the foundation. And abruptly, this didn't take we began to get a lot of visibility. And there was an interest in, this is a change, what's going on? So that kind of grabbed people for a while. But that was very, very important. So we assiduously cultivate relations with the media, and we're making the big effort that we all have to make now with the new media and all that stuff. But the old-fashioned media is still important in Boston. The Boston Globe, most of the leaders in the city still read the Boston Globe every day. And it remains one of the shrinking number of very high-quality metropolitan newspapers in America. And then public radio is huge for us, huge. When we get on public radio, there's always a big reaction to it. It's just in a town like Boston, people are listening to public radio all the time. But we've been thoughtful about that, and we've put a lot of effort into it. And finally, we've decided that we were willing to work directly with the public sector. And that took a number of forms, but again, the view was none of the problems the foundation is interested in can be dealt with without the public sector. It's not possible. So to refuse to engage with the public sector, which is the case for many, many foundations, because they don't want to be tainted by politics, to us, that's just, you're marginalizing yourself. And you've got to figure out a nonpartisan way to build these relationships and have influence with them, no matter who is in office. Can't be partisan. You can't be perceived to be lined up with somebody. And here again, there have been a few bumps in the road on that, but overall, tremendous results. And we've maintained that nonpartisan status, but we're viewed as very important in the political process. So, for instance, the last contested mayor's race in the city of Boston, there were 8 credible candidates for mayor. Every one of them asked to come to the foundation and talk to us about what they wanted to do. Every one of them. They knew we couldn't endorse them or give them any money or anything. The last gubernatorial, our very popular governor, Charlie Baker, he's been at the foundation 3 times in the last 2 weeks. So that's just emblematic of the payoff of these kinds of relationships, and we're working on some just major stuff, and that's important. And as part of the public involvement, we've also been willing, and this is the furthest out, we have been willing to get selectively directly involved in legislative campaigns on issues that are so important to us, and where if we didn't play that role, we knew it wouldn't happen. And we have put together a pretty stunning record of legislative success in healthcare, in housing and community development, education reform, community college reform. And again, it surprised us in a way how influential we were, how interested people were in what the foundation thought about anything. And so a set of very close relationships have developed, and we've transited mayors and governors and not lost a step. So we're passing that smell test of we really are nonpartisan. We're going to work with whoever has the job, and we're not going to be used by anybody. And we have one guy in particular. I have, as Joel mentioned, I have a lot of experience in city politics, and we have one other senior person who works with me on our public affairs stuff. But it's a huge part. It's a huge part of what we do. So that's sort of the Boston Foundation today. We feel that we've gotten very strong affirmation for what these big changes that we felt we needed to make. And as Joel mentioned, there has been a very flattering level of interest in this among community foundations around the country. And I think this whole issue of providing leadership, along with all the other things we provide, grants, help for donors, et cetera, providing leaders, that's the real scarce commodity in a lot of our communities. And again, you think about the attributes of these institutions, if they're well managed, I think we've shown that you can have a surprising impact and level of influence. But it really does require a culture shift. It's not about just helping donors make good grants anymore. That's important. We work very hard at that, and we've been very successful. But it's redefining. No, the role is to be a force for solving problems in our community, for improving our community. And all these attributes of the foundation are useful in that quest, but they are not the end in itself. Now, so what's wrong with this picture? Or what is preventing it from happening? And I do think it is happening. I go every year to a retreat of the 30 largest community foundation heads, the chairs of the boards and the presidents. And I've kind of tracked in my tenure there the level of interest in civic leadership. And 10 years ago, it was completely absent. We were just a total outlier. People were interested, but outlier. Now, I actually did this thing where there were about 10 of us in a room. I said, for how many of you is civic leadership now a major priority? And every hand went up. So it is happening. It's on the move. There are a lot of people talking about it, but there are some constraints. Some people report to me, gee, I'd love to be doing this, but my board would never let me do this. This is really, and I didn't have to convince a board to do something different. As the story says, they were the board itself instigated this desire for change. So that can be a tough one. Another one you hear a lot is, well, we don't have the expertise to do what you're doing. Well, we didn't either. If the job changes, the people change, right? That shouldn't be a significant barrier, but a surprising number of people say that. One of the reasons board members don't like this is that they don't want to be criticized. I mean, going on these boards, they're doing good. What's wrong with this? And if you get involved the way we're involved, you will be criticized. And in fact, if you're unwilling to be criticized, just like if you're unwilling to work with the public sector, it's a form of marginalization. Can we think of momentous social change that's happened in this country that wasn't accompanied by conflict? No, change is always accompanied by conflict. You want it within bounds. You don't want people killing each other, but it's without a willingness to have conflict or to be part of it and to be criticized. My old boss, the late great Mayor Boston, Kevin White, used to say, Paul, if nobody's pissed off at you, you're not doing anything very important. And he was doing a lot of important things, because so many people were pissed off at him just constantly. But I think there's a profound insight in that. And that's another barrier for community foundations, putting themselves out there as leaders and so forth. I can give you I've given a lot of happy talk about the media, and we have had, it stuns me how much success we've had with the media. But if you're going to raise your profile, be ready when something goes wrong, because people will be more interested in you than they would have been. And I lived that. We had a number of years ago, had someone in our finance department who made a huge accounting error, knew they had made it, covered it up, and so it came out in a very messy fashion. It resulted in our donors getting erroneous reports for one cycle, which could have been a near death, it wasn't near death, it could have been a death experience. And someone called the Globe about it. And so all of a sudden we had the top business columnist at the Boston Globe thinking there's something really here. Well, the reason he wouldn't have been interested in the old Boston Foundation, never would have, but he was interested in this. And so that just means a board, if you're going to start to go out there, you've got to have that discussion about risk tolerance and the candor of, we're probably going to be criticized, and that's going to happen, and how do we feel about that? So there are downsides, and I'll close with the thought that I said at the beginning, which is, if you think about it, 800 community foundations across this country, every town of any consequence has one. And they have, even if they're small, they have assets, they have standing, they have relationships, they have at least a theoretical potential to be leaders and to help communities understand what their challenges are and act on them. And I would love to see, Joel, for instance, national foundations get interested more than some have helped the community foundations, true, but to see it as an undeveloped asset that if you developed it, the capacity that would exist in local communities to take initiative, to take things on, and to feel like they can make a difference. There would be a tremendous boost to that, and we need that. We need local capacity and initiation. We need it always. We've never needed it more than we do now.
Paul,
I'll stop there.
Very interesting. Well, Paul, I think you all see now why I try to get Paul back here from time to time, because it's always fascinating, always interesting perspectives and impressive kinds of things they're doing. So thank you so much again for coming all down here.
Thank you. Thank you.